any fallout from that bombshell Oval Office meeting yesterday set to play out before a judge today. Both sides are due back in court in a follow-up hearing for the man mistakenly deported to El Salvador. And here is where things stand right now. A U.S. district judge ordered the government to facilitate Kilmar Abrego Garcia's return to the United States. The U.S. Supreme Court unanimously upheld that ruling, but listen to what leaders had to say yesterday during an Oval Office meeting with the president of El Salvador when asked if they would bring Abrego Garcia back home.
The ruling solely stated that if this individual, at El Salvador's sole discretion, was sent back to our country, that we could deport him a second time. No version of this legally ends up with him ever living here because he is a citizen of El Salvador. That is the president of El Salvador. Your questions about it, per the court, can only be directed to him.
The question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
So in 2019, a judge ruled Abrego Garcia could stay in the U.S. due to fear that going back to El Salvador could put his life in danger. His wife responded to yesterday's meeting, saying the Trump and Bukele administrations continue to play political games with her husband's life. And now, in a new push to secure his return, Democratic lawmakers are speaking out, calling for a meeting with President Nayib Bukele. They say not returning him would be equivalent to kidnapping. Listen.
Of course, President Trump could have just said, bring him home. Of course he could have done that. But this is an administration that has lied about Mr. Abrego Garcia, right? The vice president of the United States tweeted out that he had a criminal record. That was a lie. They're just lying. They've gotten caught lying. They don't want to admit it. And they have an obligation to bring him home. But I will say the president of El Salvador should not now take it upon himself to say that he is detaining him for one more day, because that is kidnapping. I understand that the attorney general said that we would provide a plane to bring him home. So all the president of El Salvador has to do now is hand over and release an innocent man and let him come home to his family.
Let's bring in CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes. Nancy, based on what we heard yesterday at the White House, what's the Trump administration's plan for court today?
Their plan will likely be to try to say as little as possible. This U.S. district judge has required of them that they provide regular updates on what they are doing to bring Mr. Abrego Garcia back to the U.S. And in their filings, they provide as little information as possible. First of all, because they aren't doing anything, by the White House's own admission, to try to bring him home. And second of all, because they believe that foreign policy is solely the purview of the President of the United States. And so yesterday, for example, Mugo, in a filing with the judge where they were required to report what the latest is on his status, they simply said, well, the president of El Salvador, and you played the sound just a few moments ago, says he's not sending him back. Period. And so I anticipate that they will be not very forthcoming today either, although the district judge has been getting more and more frustrated, and it's possible today that she could impose some sort of deadline on the administration by which time she wants to see this man back in U.S. custody.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens there. I also want to ask you about this because there's also, during that same meeting yesterday, the president says there is a possibility of sending American citizens who commit a violent crime to El Salvador. Listen to this and then we'll get your take on the other side.
Could we use it for violent criminals, our own violent criminals?
I call them homegrown criminals.
Yes.
I mean, the
homegrowns.
The ones that grew up and something went wrong and they hit people over the head with a baseball bat. We have, and push people into subways just before the train gets there, like you see happening sometimes. We are looking into it and we want to do it. I would love to do that.
So he calls them again, quote, homegrown criminals. I have to ask here, is this something that can be done? Is this even constitutional?
Legal experts say no, that not only would it be unprecedented, but possibly unconstitutional, a violation of the 8th Amendment to the Constitution, which says that U.S. citizens cannot be subjected to cruel and unusual punishments. Even violent criminals are afforded certain rights here in the United States when they are imprisoned, rights that they might not have access to if they were imprisoned overseas. Nevertheless, President Trump made it clear in the Oval Office yesterday that he is actively exploring this possibility, that he has tasked his attorney general with looking into the legality of it. And he said flat out to the president of El Salvador, who was there in the room with him, that he'd like him to open up more prisons so that President Trump can start sending these U.S. citizens, or homegrown criminals, as he put it, to El Salvador.
And Nancy, there is a major manufacturing development from Nvidia to start producing AI supercomputers entirely here in the United States. The president reacted to that on social media, saying, quote, all necessary permits will be expedited and quickly delivered to Nvidia, as they will to all companies committing to be part of the golden age of America. So what do we know about this, Nancy?
Well, the White House says this is the Trump effect at work, that Nvidia is one of several companies moving some production to the United States in response to these new Trump tariffs, which could potentially make it more expensive to produce overseas. Nvidia was asked point blank about this and whether this factory that they're planning to build in Texas is something that they were going to do, or if they're doing it in response to the Trump tariffs. And they said no comment. But we do know that the head of Nvidia, Jensen Huang, has been meeting with the president and eager to build a relationship, and obviously semiconductors and computer chips, something that is very badly needed here in the United States. There are challenges with the supply chain when they are built overseas, and the U.S. is an enormous market. So whether or not this was directly influenced by Trump policies, the Trump administration is calling it a win.
Of course, of course. And finally, Nancy, we have to talk about this standoff between the administration and Harvard and the move to freeze more than $2 billion in funding. That is a lot of money. What's the message from each side about this?
Well, the message from Harvard is that they are not willing to make some of the changes that the Trump administration demanded of them in order to keep their federal funding. The administration was demanding that they change some of their hiring and admissions practices in order to provide more ideological diversity. And the Harvard administration said, we are not going to let anybody tell us how to run our university or how to achieve academic freedom. So they basically said, we're not going to meet those demands. And in return, the administration froze a whopping $2.2 billion worth of grants for research conducted at Harvard University. And then just a short time ago, the president went even further online, as we suspected he would, saying that perhaps Harvard's tax-exempt status should be pulled as well. That is a major threat, because Harvard, like most educational institutions, is tax exempt. That again would be this White House straying into an area that has always been off limits to the political branch of this government, basically using the IRS to take retribution on an organization whose practices they don't like. So we'll see if President Trump actually tries to make good on this threat, or if he's just blowing off some steam.
Yeah, we shall see how all of this plays out. Nancy Cordes, thank you so much for joining us on 24/7 today. Okay, let's bring in CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez. Camilo, thanks for joining us today. I want to ask you about Kilmar Abrego Garcia's wife. What else did she have to say after that bombshell development from yesterday's meeting?
Good morning, Muga. Well, we spoke to Jennifer Abrego Garcia's wife who was a U.S. citizen, about 2 weeks ago, and she was still grappling with her husband's deportation to El Salvador and the fact that he was imprisoned at that mega prison known as Secot, which is infamous in that country. And she told us that that deportation had a severe and adverse impact on her, but also on their 5-year-old son who was born with disabilities and who also happens to be a U.S. citizen. And she put out a new statement after that meeting between Presidents Bukele and Trump. And she said in part, Mugo, as we start Holy Week, a time meant for celebration and unity, my heart aches for my husband, who should be sitting at our Easter table, leading us in prayer as he has for so many years. Instead, I find myself still praying for his safety, and return home. So clearly, while this case is playing out in federal courts, but also in the court of public opinion, there is a human element here and a human dilemma for this family.
Yeah, it's always important to remember that we're talking about people here and their family members as well. Both Bukele and the Trump administration seem to be standing firm on this and not bringing him back. So what do we expect to come out of this follow-up hearing that is happening today?
Well, Mugo, a federal district court judge in federal district court in Maryland will oversee this case yet again and will try to assess and evaluate whether the Trump administration is following her court ruling to facilitate, quote unquote, the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia. The administration, Mugo, seems to be taking the position that the word facilitate only means facilitating the entry of Mr. Abrego Garcia if the Salvadoran government agrees to release him from Secot and to bring him to the U.S. But they are saying now that El Salvador, as we heard during that White House meeting, is not inclined to release this man from their custody. And so the U.S. at this point, they argue, is powerless and cannot ensure that this man can be safely returned to the U.S. We'll see what the judge says about that argument, but she is giving the administration daily requirements to provide status updates as to Mr. Abrego Garcia's whereabouts and also the steps that the administration is taking to release him from that prison and to bring him to the U.S.
Right, and I know you'll keep us updated on what happens today. Camilo, while we have you here, I want to ask you about a Biden-era immigration policy that just got a win yesterday. Which program is this, and what did the judge have to say?
Sure. So the Biden administration created this program known as CHNV that ultimately allowed more than 500,000 people from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela to fly to the U.S. if American-based individuals sponsor them financially. And they were allowed to work here and live here legally under an immigration benefit known as parole for at least 2 years. The Trump administration terminated that program, Mugo, and actually gave those hundreds of thousands of migrants until April 24 next week to either self-deport from the country or face arrest and deportation by ICE agents and officers. But now a federal court in Massachusetts has blocked that plan, has recalled the warnings about deporting these individuals, and has barred the administration from revoking their legal status and their work permits. So this case will continue to be litigated in the federal courts, but for now, these migrants can stay in the U.S. legally for the time being.
Okay, CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez, as always, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.